everyone, and welcome to We Go Back. I'm your host, Bryan Abou Chacra, and on this week's episode, we will be reviewing The Brig and the Man Behind the Curtain, the 19th and 20th episodes from Season 3 of Lost. When we open up to The Brig, we see John, who is sitting in the brig of a boat, hence the name of the episode, burning a file after he is done reading it. We also get to see a little bit of the flashback where John gets invited by Ben to go with the others and join them. This takes us onto the beach where we see Kate and Sawyer, who seem to be back at it. But this is really all just to set up Sawyer going to take a piss and running into our B team of Jin, Hurley, and Charlie. And I really like the setup here because we now see that the B team is the one that's getting into all of this mess. With Naomi and the freighter and everything that's going on, we have these guys as the ones who are getting involved rather than Jack, Kate, Saeed, and Sawyer, who have been typically the ones who go and get into trouble. But this leads Sawyer to Locke, who convinces Sawyer to come with him on this expedition. And this will take us into our first flashback where we see John now with the others, and Ben is telling John that the only way he can be here and be free is by killing his father. That's when he'll get to learn all of the secrets of the island. And in this conversation, I did want to point out that the box is brought back up, and I feel like we're all stupid for believing it, but Ben tells him that is a metaphor, and we all kind of should have guessed that. So this will take us back to Locke walking with Sawyer through the forest, and he admits to him that he cannot kill Ben. That's why he brought Sawyer, because he knew that if Sawyer heard what he had to say, he would absolutely do it. And I think that this is a great scene because you can tell that Sawyer is obviously aware that he's being conned, and he knows that John is with the others now, so he thinks Ben is doing it, but we come to find out later in the episode that really he's getting conned by Locke. Awesome little setup here, awesome foreshadowing. We now return to the beach where Saeed has been brought in to speak with Naomi, and this scene is great here because Saeed is filled with such doubt. He's a great character to have come up against her. So she tells him that she came in a freighter and that the plane that they came in on was found in the South Pacific with all the bodies inside of it. And I love this exchange here because Saeed points out the obvious. And we know that this is true because they are not dead. And we know they exist because we saw the episode where Ben goes to the flame and asks for a file on all of the people who crashed on that plane. So that proves to us with this plane that's been found with all the bodies, there is something else going on here. So we need to be aware of that as we're moving forward. But she does tell us that Penny had sent her to the island, and we can see that Saeed is continuing to clearly doubt her, except she is able to produce that satellite phone, which is the only thing that legitimizes her claim of not being an other. We now return to the jungle where Sawyer confesses to Locke that he didn't mean to kill the man in Australia and that it was a complete accident, that really he was trying to kill somebody else. But Locke, we need to remember, knows who he was trying to kill since he read Sawyer's file. He can connect all the dots and we can see how he's been conning him the whole episode. So we'll return to the flashback here where Ben is trying to get Locke to kill Anthony Cooper at night in front of the camp. And we can see that this is really meant to show how spineless he is to everybody in the others' camp, because Anthony Cooper is there telling everyone exactly who he is, that he's spineless and can't be the man that he is. Really interesting scene, and it substantiates the conversation that Richard has with Locke later on in the episode, which hops us back to Sawyer in the jungle, and they come up to the Black Rock, and we see that it's actually Anthony Cooper in the brig, not Ben. So again, Sawyer was right about being conned, just not by Ben. Also in this scene, Danielle shows up to pick up some dynamite, which ends up coming back a little bit later on in the series. Just wanted to point out that's why we saw her there. This brings us to the flashback where we are formally introduced to Richard Alpert, and he tells John that he was meant to be embarrassed, and he says that John is special and gives him the file that we saw him reading at the beginning of the episode. So now we know where Locke got all the information. In the Black Rock, we find out that Anthony Cooper is actually the man from Tallahassee, and we hear how he got to the island, and I believe what he's telling us is totally true, except for the part about them all being in hell. I think his story about how he got to the island is accurate because what reason would he possibly have to lie to Sawyer about why he got here? And we do know that the box is a metaphor, but really big scene because Sawyer finally meets Sawyer, and this scene is huge because we see the realization on James' face that he's met the guy he was trying to kill in Australia. So Locke was right. When you hear what he has to say, you'll want to kill him. We now return to Locke in the flashback being left behind by the others and told not to return to the camp unless he's carrying the body of his father. You can see that Ben is really pushing Locke here, and I think that the conversation Richard had is really being shown in this point, that maybe Ben isn't the guy we think he is. We'll return to the Black Rock where we have James making Sawyer read the letter, and he goes through most of it but ends up tearing it up. This thing that he's been chasing for his whole life, this man, Sawyer, who caused his mom and dad to die, he has in front of him, and he has just crossed the line with them, gets his justice. Really love to see this scene. We now return to the beach where Kate finally informs Jack that all the people on the beach no longer trust him because of how he's been since he returned. And once she reveals that Naomi is there, his focus seems entirely shifted to her. I think that this scene shows a lot about Jack's character once you know what happens at the end of Man Behind the Curtain, because you're seeing that something is going on when Juliet brings up, should we tell her? And I think Jack very wisely doesn't want to tell her yet, because we know what Kate does when she's clued in on some plans. He's finally being smart about his decision making. We now return to the Black Rock where Locke exposes that Juliet is a mole to Sawyer and tells him about the raid that's going to happen very shortly and that they're going to come to take the kids. Sawyer finds out that Locke also used to be crippled in the scene, and I think he's the first person to realize that John used to be that way. I like that line, he used to be. And then to close out the episode, we get to see John Locke carry his dead father over his back and he walks off. And this will take us to the Man Behind the Curtain where we open up outside of Portland. We see Ben being born, so he has lied about being born on the island. We now know this for a fact. And also we find out his mother dies during childbirth. So this is a pretty interesting experience. We know that people on the island have issues with their parents. We now see one with Ben. Pretty cool. This takes us to the others where Locke returns with his dead father on his back, and he finally wants Ben to tell him everything about the island. And Ben starts to tell him about Jacob and all of this great stuff. And I wonder how much of what he's saying is a lie, because we do know that Ben will always lie to get what he wants. He has admitted to it. And I think it's cool here that Locke calls him out on it. This takes us into our first flashback where we see a young Ben getting off the sub and coming to the island, going through the Dharma orientation. And Ben, interestingly, as we find out, doesn't really like to speak. His father, however, is Roger Workman, the guy who we saw dead in that VW bus when Hurley and Charlie got it running. Really cool that all of these things are being tied together right now. We'll now jump back to the others' camp where Mikhail comes rushing in to warn Ben about the freighter that's coming to the island, and he says that this needs to be addressed immediately. Ben is trying to get out of taking Locke to see Jacob, so he says that it's going to have to be postponed. However, I love Locke in this scene. He really plays his trump card. He asserts himself, tells the group, because he knows this is how Ben plays the game. He tells them all that Ben was actually going to take him to see Jacob and that they have to go, and he beats Mikhail to prove his point. Really, really cool to see Locke be in control. And if you're wondering why Locke had to beat up Mikhail so bad, I think it was really to show that he wasn't a coward, because that's what Ben was trying to establish by making him kill his father in front of the group. As they're leaving, though, Alex comes up and gives Locke a gun, and she's one of the only people in this episode that remembers Ben's birthday. She wishes him a happy birthday. We now go back to our flashback where Ben sees an attack by the hostiles while he's in a class. And in this episode, they're talking about a volcano and a volcano that used to be on the island. That's something that we will get back to later on, but I don't want to talk about it right now. Just pay attention to it, because it is there and it is showing you something on that board. Always got to look in the background. But really in this flashback, what we see is that Ben's father is a total drunk, doesn't want to be there unless he's getting double pay because he doesn't want to get shot at. Now we'll return to the scene where Ben tells John that Jacob is not a person who you go see. He is somebody who summons you. And John is really kind of playful in this scene. eating a mango and telling him that there's a first time for everything. But I think what I really want you folks to focus on as you're watching Jon in this part is that he's not letting Ben dissuade him. He is focused on his goal. He has a mission and he's not going to stop until he gets what he wants. I think that's really the point of all of this. He's tired of waiting. He's tired of having people tell him that there's another thing he has to do. He's here. He wants it now, and he's putting the pressure on Ben. You can pay attention to Ben's reaction, and he really doesn't know what to do. This takes us to our flashback where Anne, the young girl who's been Ben's friend since he got to the island, does remember that it's his birthday. And I did want to point out that a lot of these flashbacks in this episode are on Ben's birthday. And in this scene, we do see her give that gift to Ben. And we now know that Ben's father totally forgets his birthday every year and blames Ben for his mother's death. And so Ben runs off. He is miserable there, doesn't want to be there, and runs all the way out to the sonar fence. So we did get an explanation for why that sonar fence was there in this episode. If you didn't pick up on that, in the orientation, they talked about that fence being there to protect them from the hostiles. So we do know that the hostiles are a real thing because we heard Mikhail talk about it when they were in the flame. So a lot of what Mikhail said is actually being shown in these flashbacks. You just need to pay attention to see those parts coming up. But we haven't seen him in any of the Ben flashbacks, so maybe he wasn't part of the Dharma Initiative. We now return to the beach where they're having a meeting on what to do about the others' raid coming up. And I really like this scene because when Jack comes up and he already knows what's going on, everybody stops in their tracks. He says, I knew this was going to happen. I just didn't know what to do about it yet. And I think he's realized now that if you're going to be a leader, sometimes you have to keep people out of the loop. And I think this is what we're seeing here. This also proves John Locke's point that Jack must have a plan. He had a plan before. He was going to get off the island and bring rescue back. And now he has another plan. Just got to pay attention to the type of person that he is. I like that Locke was aware and able to see that. We now return to our flashback where Ben finally escapes the barracks and finds Richard Alpert. Now we have to think that Ben is probably around 42, 43. A young Ben sees Richard Alpert, who looks pretty much the same when Ben is closer to like 30 or 32. And then he pretty much looks the same as he does now. Interesting. Ever young Mr. Alpert, I guess. Ben wants to go though. He wants to leave this place. He doesn't want to be here. But he is told by Richard that he has to be patient and he has to wait. Now, one thing that I wanted to point out about this young Ben, I mean, we're all sitting here and I wanted to really have you guys think about, he seems so innocent and kind here. He seems like a boy who's just misunderstood and wants somebody to appreciate him. How in the world does he become the person that he is? That's something that we're all going to have to think about, theorize. Send me those theories. We go back podcast@gmail.com. We now hit our tipping point because Ben and Locke arrive at the cabin. And this whole scene, really, I'm sitting there watching it. And when I watched it the first time, I really remember thinking that this was something that was like really crazy and really intense. And I believed wholeheartedly what I was seeing. I wonder what you guys thought as you watched it for the first time. Again, email me, wegobackpodcast@gmail.com. I really love seeing what you guys think. And I remember just being totally bewildered. But now as I'm watching it, especially now as we know how the episode ends, was what Ben was doing in this scene putting on a show? Because he gets called out on it. Look at how he reacts. Look at why he shoots him and throws him in that ditch. Locke's 100% right here. He says that he's lying and putting on a show. Look at how surprised Ben has been throughout this entire episode, especially when Jacob actually showed up. Pay attention to Ben this whole episode. I really, really mean it. There's a lot that he does with his acting. This guy won an Emmy for this role for a reason. This will take us back to our flashback where Ben and his father finally get to spend a birthday together. Ben gets to have kind of a heart-to-heart with his dad, but it really ends up being too little too late. He tells his dad that he is a patient man and that he's had to endure his father his whole life. And I think he's saying that, honestly, with a bit of entitlement. Like he should be rewarded with something. I think what he thinks he's doing here, he's doing for a great cause. But really, I think he's just doing it selfishly. Anyway, he gasses his father, and I think this shows you that Ben really has no limits, that he will go as far as killing his own family to get what he wants. That is also mirrored in the next scene where we see that Ben really killed everyone that he grew up with, not just his dad. He killed the whole community he grew up with, and I think the only person he cared or respected for was Horace, but he even killed him to get what he wanted. This shows you his extreme. And then we see again that happens when he shoots Locke, because he can't take that Locke heard Jacob speak. He is totally jealous of Locke. You can totally see it in his behavior. You can see throughout the whole episode that Locke has realized that this guy is playing people for fools and that they couldn't possibly believe that what he's doing is actually true. But Ben, when faced with that adversity, we really kind of always see him as a man who's struggling, as if his back is against the wall. Ben really doesn't seem like he is constantly in control the way he believes that he is. Rather, it just seems like he's in a panic mode. And really, you get to see that throughout this whole episode. You see a very different side of Ben and an extremely different side of Locke. Really awesome episode. Next week, we are going to do something a little bit different. We're only going to cover the greatest hits for next week, because the season finale of Lost, it's going to be really, really long. That'd be way too much to try to pack into one episode. Don't like splitting up season finales. So next week, only one episode. We're doing greatest hits. Send me your thoughts, questions, theories. You know the drill. We go back podcast at gmail.com. Really great to hear from you folks. You can follow me on Twitter at KingLordBryan. Always going to be having fun talking to people there. Hope to see you guys soon. Have a good rest of your night.